June 19th, 1867. Cerro de las Campanas, Mexico. An emperor stands before a firing squad. He's 34 years old. 19 days ago, he believed he might still be saved. Today he knows the truth. Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph of Austria, Emperor of Mexico, is about to die. But the bullets are not the worst part. The worst part is what they did to him in the 19 days before. The psychological warfare. The false hope. The systematic destruction of everything an emperor is supposed to be. This is the story of how the Mexican Republic didn't just execute Maximilian. They dismantled him piece by piece, until nothing remained but a broken man begging for death. Maximilian wasn't supposed to be in Mexico. He was an Austrian archduke, brother to Emperor Franz Joseph Ortiz. He had a castle, a beautiful wife, a comfortable life in Europe. But Napoleon III of France convinced him that Mexico wanted an emperor, that the Mexican people were crying out for stable European rule, that he would be welcomed as a liberator. It was all a lie. When Maximilian arrived in Mexico in 1864, he found a country torn apart by civil war. Liberals against conservatives, Republicans against monarchists, and him, a naive European aristocrat, caught in the middle. For 3 years, he tried to rule. He meant well. He even sided with liberal reforms, alienating his conservative backers. But good intentions don't stop bullets. By 1867, Napoleon III had withdrawn French troops. Maximilian's empire was collapsing. Benito Juarez, the Republican president, was closing in. On May 15, 1867, Maximilian surrendered at Querétaro. He expected to be treated as a head of state, to be allowed to abdicate and return to Europe. He was wrong. If you're interested in diplomatic correspondence and military records from the Mexican War of Reform, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us continue unearthing the truths buried in 19th century archives. Now let's return to Maximilian's cell, May 1867. Juarez ordered Maximilian tried for treason, not as an emperor, as a usurper. As a foreign invader who had illegally claimed Mexican sovereignty. The trial was a formality. Everyone knew the verdict before it began. What they didn't know was how long they would make him wait. For 19 days, Maximilian sat in his cell at the convent of the Capuchins. He could hear his own death being prepared. The construction of the platform. The selection of the firing squad. The measuring of the coffins. Every day, his lawyers told him there was hope, that European powers were negotiating for his release, that Juarez might show mercy. Every day was a lie. But they kept telling him anyway. This wasn't mercy. This was torture. Because hope, when it's false, becomes the cruelest weapon of all. Maximilian wrote letters to his wife Charlotte, who had gone mad trying to save him, to his brother Franz Joseph, begging for intervention that never came, to Juarez himself, offering to abdicate, to leave Mexico forever, anything to avoid execution. None of it mattered. The Mexican Republic had decided. Maximilian had to die. Not just die, but die publicly, humiliated, stripped of all imperial dignity. They dressed him in black, not imperial robes, not even a military uniform, just black civilian clothes, like a common criminal. They made him walk, from his cell to the hill where he would die, through streets lined with soldiers and civilians. Some jeered, some wept, most just stared. Maximilian kept his composure. Even at the end, he tried to be an emperor. At Cerro de las Campanas, 3 men waited: Maximilian, General Miguel Miramon, and General Tomas Mejia. His 2 loyal generals would die beside him. Maximilian asked to stand in the center, so his generals wouldn't die in the middle. Even facing death, he thought about protocol. The firing squad raised their rifles. Maximilian gave each soldier a gold coin. He asked them to aim for his heart, not his face. He wanted his mother to be able to recognize him. Then he said his final words: "I forgive everyone, and I ask everyone to forgive me. May my blood, which is about to be shed, be for the good of the country. Viva Mexico! Viva la Independencia!" Even at the end, he was trying to salvage meaning from meaninglessness, trying to turn his execution into something noble, instead of what it really was: the public humiliation of a man who never should have been there. The squad fired, but they didn't aim for his heart. They aimed for his body. He didn't die immediately. An officer had to walk up and deliver the coup de grace. A single bullet to the head. Maximilian's body fell. The emperor who had come to save Mexico died in the dirt, shot like a traitor. But here's what makes this story even more tragic. It didn't have to happen. Multiple European governments tried to intervene. The United States asked for clemency. Even Giuseppe Garibaldi, the great Republican revolutionary, pleaded for Maximilian's life. Juarez refused them all. Not because Maximilian was dangerous. By the time of his execution, his empire was dead. His army scattered. He posed no threat. Juarez ordered his execution because Maximilian was a symbol of foreign intervention, of European imperialism, of everything the Mexican Republic had fought against. And symbols must be destroyed completely. No mercy, no reprieve. Just death, public and humiliating. Maximilian's body was embalmed and returned to Austria months later. But something had been lost in those 19 days. Something more than just his life. His dignity, his hope. His belief that the world was a place where good intentions and noble birth mattered. They stripped all of that away before they killed him. They made sure he died knowing he'd been a fool. That his empire had been a farce. That everything he'd tried to do had been meaningless. If you heard Maximilian's story tonight, let it stay with you. Leave a comment. Tell us what you felt when you learned how an idealistic archduke was transformed into a cautionary tale about imperial ambition. And if you want more untold stories buried in history's shadows, subscribe. Because some truths deserve to be remembered. Especially the ones about well-meaning people who died for other people's wars. Maximilian came to Mexico believing he could make a difference. He died knowing he'd been used by France, abandoned by Austria, and executed by the very people he thought he was saving. The bullets killed his body. But those 19 days killed everything else. He was 34 years old. He believed in progress. He tried to be a good emperor. And they made sure he died knowing none of it had mattered. But let's talk about those 19 days in more detail. About what really happened in that cell at the convent of the Capuchins. Maximilian wasn't kept in a proper prison cell. He was held in a monk's cell, barely large enough for a bed and a small table. The walls were bare stone. The only window looked out onto the courtyard where they were building his execution platform. He could hear the hammering, day after day, the construction of the place where he would die. That wasn't accidental. The Mexican authorities wanted him to hear it, wanted him to think about his coming death with every blow of the hammer. According to letters preserved in Austrian archives, Maximilian barely slept during those 19 days. How could he? The sound of his own death being built kept him awake at night. During the day, his lawyers visited. They brought news. Always hopeful news. Prussia was negotiating for his release. Austria was sending diplomats. The United States was applying pressure. None of it was entirely true. There were diplomatic efforts, yes, but Juarez had made his decision. Nothing would change it. But Maximilian didn't know that. So every day, he hoped. And every night, when no rescue came, he despaired. This cycle of hope and despair, repeated for 19 days, is a form of psychological torture. It breaks people down more effectively than physical pain ever could. The Mexican authorities knew this. They could have executed Maximilian immediately after the trial. The verdict was never in doubt. But they waited. Let him sit in that cell. Let him hear the hammering. Let him cycle through hope and despair again and again. Why? Because they wanted him broken. Wanted him to stop being an emperor and become just a man. A frightened, desperate man who would beg for his life. And it worked. In his final letters, Maximilian did beg. Not directly, perhaps. He was too proud for that. But he offered everything. He would renounce all claims to Mexico. He would speak publicly against European intervention. He would do anything if they just let him live. Juarez read those letters and did nothing. Because this wasn't about Maximilian the man. This was about Maximilian the symbol, and symbols can't be allowed to survive. On June 19th, when they finally came for him, Maximilian was almost relieved. The waiting was over. The uncertainty was done. He would die, but at least he would know. They let him out of his cell at dawn. The walk to Cerro de las Campanas took about 30 minutes. 30 minutes through the streets of Querétaro, past people who had once cheered his arrival and now watched his death march in silence. Maximilian's two generals, Miramon and Mejia, walked beside him. These men had stayed loyal when everyone else abandoned him. They could have fled, could have saved themselves, but they chose to die with their emperor. At the execution site, there was confusion. The firing squad didn't know their positions. The officer in charge had to reorganize them. For 10 minutes, Maximilian stood there, waiting to die, while soldiers shuffled around trying to figure out where to stand. It was farcical, humiliating. The execution of an emperor reduced to a disorganized mess. Finally, they were ready. Maximilian gave his final speech. Those words about forgiveness, about his blood being for Mexico's good, about Viva la Independencia. Some historians believe he meant those words, that even at the end, he truly believed his death might help Mexico. Others believe he was still performing, still trying to be the emperor he thought he was supposed to be. Either way, the firing squad didn't care. They fired, and as I mentioned, they didn't aim where Maximilian had asked. He'd requested they shoot his heart and spare his face. They shot his torso multiple times, but not fatally. Maximilian fell, bleeding, but conscious, aware, knowing he was dying but not dead yet. The officer in charge had to approach and fire the final shot, point blank, into Maximilian's head. That final indignity, to lie bleeding in the dirt while someone walked up and shot you in the head like a wounded animal. That's how the Emperor of Mexico died. Not cleanly, not with dignity, but messily, painfully, humiliatingly. Afterward, they displayed the bodies. Let people come. And look at the dead emperor and his generals. Proof that the Mexican Republic had won. That foreign intervention had failed. That emperors could die like anyone else. Maximilian's body was embalmed quickly. The Mexican heat made decomposition rapid. But there were disputes about what to do with it. Juarez wanted the bodies buried in Mexico. Wanted to deny the Austrians even the comfort of burying their Archduke at home. But international pressure eventually forced him to relent. Months later, Maximilian's body was released and shipped back to Austria. Charlotte, his wife, never knew. She had gone mad in 1866, trying and failing to convince European powers to save her husband. She spent the next 60 years in asylums and castles, lost in delusions, occasionally asking about Maximilian as if he might still come home. She outlived him by 60 years, never recovering, never understanding that the empire had failed and her husband had died before a firing squad in Mexico. That's another tragedy of this story. Maximilian died knowing his wife had gone mad, knowing she'd destroyed herself trying to save him, knowing he'd brought her to that, all because he believed Napoleon III's lies about Mexico wanting an emperor. Here's the thing about Maximilian. He genuinely tried to be a good ruler. He supported liberal reforms, tried to improve conditions for indigenous Mexicans, opposed the conservative factions that had invited him. But it didn't matter, because he was foreign, because he was imposed by France, because he represented everything Mexico had fought against. His good intentions meant nothing. His reforms meant nothing. His death meant everything. Juarez needed to show that Mexico would not tolerate foreign emperors, that the age of intervention was over, that Mexico belonged to Mexicans. And he proved it with Maximilian's blood. Was it necessary? Historians still debate this. Some argue Juarez had no choice, that showing mercy would have encouraged future interventions, that Maximilian's execution sent a message that protected Mexican sovereignty for generations. Others argue it was excessive, that Maximilian was a puppet, not a threat, that his execution was revenge, not justice. Both might be true. What's undeniable is the cruelty of those 19 days. The psychological torture of false hope. The stripping away of imperial dignity. The reduction of an emperor to a desperate man begging for life. That was unnecessary. Juarez could have executed Maximilian immediately after the trial. Could have spared him the 19 days of waiting and hoping and despairing. But he didn't, because the cruelty was the point. Because breaking Maximilian was as important as killing him. And it worked. By the time Maximilian died on that hill in Querétaro, he wasn't an emperor anymore. He was just a 34-year-old man who'd made a catastrophic mistake and paid for it with everything. His empire, his dignity, his wife's sanity, his life, all gone. All stripped away piece by piece over 19 days of psychological warfare. The bullets were just the final act.